Here is a quick review of what we did in our last class. We talked about using white pencil to shade on black paper, and it's called reverse shading. We learned how to draw cylinders and we learned how to draw cones, and we shaded them with this. I'm going to do a quick review of that so you can practice. When we start off with our cylinder, we're going to make a cylinder where you cannot see the top. So we're going to curve our line upwards, and we're not going to press too hard with this because we don't really want heavy outlines. Okay, there's the top, curves up, two parallel lines on the side. And if you remember, parallel lines are lines that don't cross each other, don't touch. And try to get those as straight as you can. It's okay if you're a little bit off. Mine's a little bit off. All right, and then for the bottom of the cylinder, we have our curve. If you are not too sure about drawing your cylinders or cones, go back to the demonstration videos that we watched last class. They're on YouTube on this channel. Okay. We also talked about designating where your light source is. For all of my forms that I do on this demonstration, the light source is going to be right up here, and so my light is going to be coming from that light source. As a result, this will be the lighter side and the right side will be the darker side. Okay, now that's not always going to be the case. When you're drawing from objects that are directly in front of you, it all depends on where the light's coming from, how many light sources there are. This is just hypothetical now. Okay, we're just going to work on the actual shading. Okay, so we also talked about how with regular shading, for your dark area, excuse me, you press really hard. But if you're using a white pencil and you press really hard, what's going to happen? It gets lighter. So it's the reverse or the opposite. When we shade a cylinder, even though it's a rounded object, we use straight lines. And I actually don't start out pressing as hard as I did because that's kind of too much, too soon. I just wanted you to be able to see. Okay, so I'm going to lightly put my lines in, and as I get away from the light source, it gets darker, so I'm going to lighten up on my white pencil. If you can go up and down in one pencil stroke, that's fine. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. If you have to draw it or shade it, excuse me, without going all the way from the top to the bottom, that's fine. Not an issue, you just clean it up a little later. Now looking at that, it's lighter on this side, darker on this side, but I want to blend it a little more here. So I'm actually going to go over here where the light hits the cylinder, and I'm going to make it lighter, really bright. Just like that. And then as I go away from it, I lighten up. I blend with my pencil point. Do not use your fingers to blend because your fingers contain grease and dirt and all sorts of things that you'll rub into your paper. So with enough practice, you can blend just with the pencil. Okay, so there's my shaded cylinder. Now I'll be honest, I left my eraser across the room, and you can use your eraser to lighten up areas, get rid of that outline. I'll go back and get that in a minute. All right, there was a little confusion on how to shade cones. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a cone in here. I'm not going to draw the entire lips. I'm just going to draw the front, even though I know that there's one back there. I'm going to go ahead and very lightly put in my center guideline because I want my cone to be nice and even. Just like that. I'm going to decide how tall I want it. And then on the sides, I'm going to put diagonal lines, but they're going to be straight lines. So let's put those in. Probably would work better if I used my pencil point instead of the side of my pencil. Okay, now again, my light source is coming from over here. You don't have to draw an arrow every time. For me, it's just for teaching. That's up to you. Now, when I shade this cone, every time I bring the pencil up, it needs to go to the point. I saw some people last class doing this and shading it with lines like this where they get smaller as they go down here. This is not going to work because if you're putting straight lines across it like that, you're going to make it look flat like a triangle. So consider this. Let me just draw a quick one here. Get my center guideline. Okay. Think about this. When I'm shading, I'm going to treat this like a partly opened umbrella. And you think about the metal spokes on the umbrella. Well, they start at the top and they get wider as they go, but they all go up to the top there. Okay, it's kind of like a woman's long dress as well. Here's the waist, and if it's a full skirt, it comes out like this, but it doesn't get any bigger at the waist. So let's demonstrate. I'm going to go with a very light touch at first. I know this is my lighter side, but watch how I shade. I'm not shading across like this. I'm shading up to the top. And you see how my center guideline disappeared? That's because I drew it in very lightly. Okay, so I have gone ahead, and again, pencil goes to the top every time. And you see how it's spread out at the bottom, but not at the top. All right, I'm going to go back, and I'm going to lighten my light side. And again, still going up to the top every time, getting wider at the bottom. And as I get away from the light, I lighten up on my pencil a little bit. I don't press as hard. And I can go back in there and brighten that even more. And remember, as I said before, not every object you draw is going to have your light coming from the left. So you really have to look at what it is you're drawing. Now, something that's kind of cool that you can do is a cast shadow on this. I'm going to go ahead and move this up a little bit out of the way. And I'm going to draw one here. Let's just go with a cone again. That way you can watch me shade it again. Nice light center guideline. And remember that center guideline parallel with the side of the paper. It's at a 90-degree angle to the bottom of my cone. Okay, my straight diagonal lines. And this takes practice. I've been doing this for a long, long time. So if this is the first time you do it and you don't have as much success as you want, keep in mind that drawing is like anything else. It's like playing an instrument. It's like performing a dance or playing a sport. The more you practice it, the better you're going to get. Okay, so again, here's my light source. And this is a good review for you. Shading up to the top every time. And again, this takes practice. Like I said, keep thinking about that partially open umbrella there, and that will help you with your shading. Okay, gonna go lighter on the light side, not pressing quite as hard as I go. Because this is a rounded surface here, I'm not going to have a line where the light stops and the dark starts. It blends into one another, just like on the cylinder. Okay, so there's my shading. Actually, could shade a little bit better here. So I'm looking at my screen and I'm noticing that I didn't come all the way to the bottom. Okay, so I'm shaded. Sorry, I'm going to blend this in a little more. All right, so let's say I want to put a shadow here to show it's on the table. Well, the first thing I have to do is give myself a horizontal line. I call that a table line. And that's just showing me that it's sitting on a surface. Now, here's the thing. Again, we're used to drawing shadows in and shading them in dark. Well, got to do the opposite. So my shadow goes the same direction as my light source. So what I'm going to do, whoops, is not move the paper, is I'm going to sketch this in. And also remember, the cast shadow, or the shadow that's from the bottom, it comes from the bottom of the form. It doesn't come up from here or anywhere along there. It comes from the bottom of the form. And since this is a cone, I'm making this really, really long, and I didn't mean to. But since this is a cone, those lines come together. Okay, here's my shadow. If it's a dark shadow, I'm not going to shade it in. What I'm going to do is shade in around it. Now you have to be careful that you don't blend in with that. So I'm going to not press as hard there. Okay, and then I'm going to bring the white all the way up to those lines I made for the shadow. Now, why do you think I'm shading in this direction and not up and down? Well, the answer is that this is a flat table that I'm working on. And if it's flat, shading is going to go in that direction. If I go this way, it's not going to look correct. All right, let's shade this part. Same thing. And I bring it right up to the edge. It's kind of cool too because my outline disappears as well. All right, so there is my cast shadow. Okay, so quick review. I've got my cylinder, shading with my lines up and down on that one. I've got my cone, shading with the line ending at the top of the cone every time, like a partly open umbrella. And then if I'm doing my cast shadow in reverse shading, I leave that the black or the color of the paper and actually color in around it with horizontal lines to make the flat table. So that's our review and how to do this cast shadow here. Some of the things we were drawing also were rounded objects, and I want to talk to you a little bit about shading those. So I'm going to flip that paper like that, and I don't have it here with me, but one of the objects that we were drawing in class was a pear. There were quite a few people drawing pears. I did kind of a mini lesson for a few people, and we talked about how pear, or our pear that we were looking at, is made up of a sphere. And if you remember, we always sketch our circles. We don't try to do one particular line. And you can do it one of two ways. You can put another sphere here, and then go ahead and work on your contour or your edge. A second way that we did it was to do our sphere, and it takes a little while to get this. Again, I've been doing it for a long time. We talked about making it look like there was a cone sitting on it, kind of like a clown hat, and it overlaps because it's sitting on it. Then we cut off the top of the cone. I think it's looking a little distorted again because of the camera. It looks a lot straighter on my paper. Okay, so you see where I got those shapes, either two spheres or a sphere with a cone on top and cut off. All right, shading the pear. I'm going to go to this one, and again, my fault, I don't have my eraser. But here's my light source, okay, from the left again. And we know that this area is going to be lighter. Now, I'm going to use this one as my mistake. If I start shading straight up and down, I'm going to flatten it. It's not going to look round. So I have to think about the roundness here and here. And I can actually shade with small strokes, and I'm going up in this direction around it. So I'm going to use little small strokes, and I'm not going to press too hard. Looks like I'm pressing really hard on the screen, but I'm not. And I'm going to come up and around like this. Now, is this the only way to shade it? Of course not. Every teacher that you work with is going to give you different ways. Best thing to do is you take everything you learned, put it together, and make it work for you. Now what I did here, because this dips in a little bit, is I went in this direction. So I've started coming around here in this direction and then round it out again. And I'm going to fade a little bit as I go. Now, since this is my light side, I'm going to go back in after I know the direction in which I'm taking my pencil strokes. I'm going to go in here. What's important to realize is not every pear you draw, or cylinder, or cone, is going to look like this demonstration. This is hypothetical. This is an educated guess. Notice when I'm shading down here, I'm going with the circle as well. And I'm going to barely put white on that. And this just makes it look a little rounder. Okay, I'm going to get my eraser. Give me a minute. When I loaded everything up to bring upstairs to work on this, I forgot my eraser. So I'm going to clean it up a little bit. I'm going to get rid of some guidelines there. It's like that. Get rid of this little line here because I don't need it right now. Okay, got a mess. All right, so working on this a little bit, and if I want to put it on a table, there's my table line. just like that. All right, and a shadow for this, I'm going to do a little guessing because I don't have it in front of me. And cast shadow always depends too on where your light's coming from. If there's any other light in the room, let's say you're working by a window, or possibly, oh, you have a light on in the other room. There's just so many variables. So that's why, even though we're just doing these off the top of our head for practice, when you're actually doing drawings of an object, you have to look at the object. Running into my other space there. Again, my pencil lines are horizontal because this is the table. And you notice I try not to have a heavy outline around there either. All right, and gonna have to put the stem on there too. I'm not gonna draw the whole stem because it's gonna be lighter on one side than the other. All right, hopefully this will help and give you a little introduction into reverse shading and into shading on rounded forms.